Hey, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. It's Emma. You've entered Spooky Town, USA. It is that time of year where we get to all whip out our spookiest books, and I thought I would give some of my recommendations and some of my really loved spooky books to you guys, because a lot of people have been asking for spooky Halloween, October, fall, autumn, pumpkin book recommendations. So here we are. I'm just gonna jump into it because it's quite late in the evening and I don't normally film around this time, and honestly, I'm really sleepy right now, so we're gonna see how this goes. Let's get into the books. Book number one that I wanted to throw on here, we've got quite a strange assortment of books, but first one I decided to go with a classic, the old granddaddy of Gothic literature, The Castle of Atranto by Horace Walpole. I've actually yet to read this, and that's quite something, seeing as the Gothic is purportedly one of my favorite genres of literature, but our good friend Horace wanted his friends to think that he had found a manuscript and that he had translated it, and it was this story dating from the Crusades in the Italian medieval period, and he had translated it, put it out, and it shocked his friends and family because it is the story of one Manfred, who is the Count of Atranto, the castle, and this book opens with him trying to marry and basically get on with the marriage ceremony of his son Conrad. These plans are quickly dashed because something awful befalls, literally, Conrad. So that's where we kind of take off. There's a whole bunch of hauntings and ghostly things, Gothic things, supernatural things. I think it's a perfect spooky read, probably. Haven't read it, but as well, most of these books on here kind of could like work together to make my dream October TBR as well, I think. So I decided to throw Castle of Atranto on here as the first one, so there we go. This next book I have read, and it was actually my favorite standalone novel of 2019. I loved this book so much. It was exactly the kind of grotesque, awful, kind of cutting book that I wanted and needed, and that so often turn out to be most of my favorite books. Like, they're made up of the things that are in this book, and that is The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kiersten White. This is, yes, a retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the classic novel. It was just so good. I think I've mentioned before, starting this, I was so scared because most times when we get into classic novel retellings and a lot of different retellings and kinds and things like that, they're not good. They don't do the original story and the original tale justice, but The Dark Descent really just dredges up the story of Frankenstein and stitches it into so many new fabrics and pieces and ways of looking at the story that maybe you hadn't really thought of reading the real Frankenstein. But The Dark Descent does follow Elizabeth, who we all know is Victor's cousin and wife. It follows her story basically all the way from the beginning of Frankenstein to the end of Frankenstein, and seeing through her perspective is out of this world. It's so good. The relationships and the way that they are written down in this retelling by Kiersten White, they just, ooh, the relationship between Victor and Elizabeth, and so disturbing. I love the quote that calls it a beautiful tapestry of horror, because it is so horrifying, but like you can't look away from it, you can't stop reading. It's kind of this, it's such an obsessive, scary, awful thing. I don't want to give away any spoilers, even though I want to talk about everything in here, and that might seem weird to you that I'm saying I don't want to spoil anything, even though it's a famous novel. But the way, oh my gosh, the way that Kiersten White works things in, little things in, little details, and little horrifying, scary details that really turn Frankenstein into, if possible, something even more terrifying, is incredible. I love this book. It got under my skin so much. It was kind of the exact awfulness that I wanted so badly, and it was just so good. I can't wait to read this for myself, because as it is, I've only listened to the audiobook. Oh wait, maybe I want to read you guys the first sentence of each of these books. I used to do that. Let's bring it back. Chapter 1. Lightning clawed across the sky, tracing veins through the clouds and marking the pulse of the universe itself. So good. I gave this 5 stars. I really want to read it again. I don't know if that's going to happen before 2020 rings out, but we'll see. Next up, we have another Gothic novel. I love this one as well. This was quite a recent read for me, and it was the Dark Academics book for September. That book is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I loved it. Once again, everything dark and disgusting and awful that I loved, but also this take on the Gothic and this unraveling and unspooling of the story that goes on in here as you as a reader go through it, and like you following this trail that Sylvia has basically wound for you through Mexico, because this story follows our protagonist Noemi, and she gets a very distressing letter from her cousin Catalina, who has newly married into an English family, and so she has gone to live with her husband Victor. I think his name's Victor. You can never trust a Victor, apparently. So she has gone to live with her new husband Virgil at High Place, which is the Doyle family high mansion, high abode, high estate. Noemi goes in search of her cousin, and once she gets to High Place, she finds out that some really terrifying things are going down. Everyone's convinced that Catalina has tuberculosis, but as Noemi finds out, that's not necessarily true. And so we start to follow her descent into madness and into the architecture of this house, which is one of my favorite things ever concerning the Gothic literature is architecture. This house, High Place, has so much going on for it. Once again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the commentary that runs and builds these structures in Mexican Gothic thoroughly impressed me. I thought it was so good. So good, the way that she did it and the way that she portrayed it and the way that she built up this thing, literally, and it was amazing. I will say, if you are really squeamish, don't read this book, because there's quite a few really disgusting, disturbing scenes. I loved it and I just really overall enjoyed this. I loved seeing through the eyes of Noemi, who's always this very vibrant, youthful, alive, fizzy, bubbly champagne, sparkling water kind of girl, and it's just really nice having her there in the darkness and gloom and doom of High Place, and in this really awful atmosphere, and in this really toxic, awful, disgusting Doyle family. So all the elements in here were so great. I love the mystery, I love the intrigue, I love the mushrooms. Yeah, really recommend. Next up in this recommendations video, I had to put The Bloody Chamber and Other Stories by Angela Carter. I have yet to sink my teeth or anything else into these stories, but I'm quite excited to, because in these stories, The Bloody Chamber and the rest of the little short stories and things like that in here, Angela Carter retells classic fairy tales. For example, I know this one has a retelling. They're quite dark and spooky retellings, for example, of Little Red Riding Hood, Bluebeard, Puss in Boots, Beauty and the Beast, and then steeping them and like letting them soak in the Gothic tradition and kind of revitalizing them and placing them back within this tradition and history and genre, which sounds like exactly everything I've ever wanted ever. But the story for which this collection is named The Bloody Chamber begins... Wait, that's kind of saucy. Maybe I shan't read you. Regardless, I really want to get embroiled into everything that's in here, so that is The Bloody Chamber. Next up, we have a book that I absolutely know I'm going to love and probably give 5 stars to. It was probably the most recommended book to me that you guys have ever recommended. It came shortly as a recommendation after I finished up 100 Years of Solitude, which is so far my favorite read of 2020, one of my favorite books of all time. I think, honestly, I would call it the best book I've ever written, but we're not talking about 100 years right now. And that book is The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. Yeah. I just absolutely know I'm gonna love this. So basically the plot line of this, if you don't know what 100 Years of Solitude about, it sounds quite similar, but I'm sure it's in actual fact quite different. We are following this family, and the patriarch, his name is Esteban, he is very interested in just getting political power. That is all he's interested in, all he wants, and he's quite also tied though to his delicate wife Clara, who has a tie herself to the supernatural and to the spirit world, and she's able to communicate and kind of cross this void and communicate with spirits and stuff like that. I also know that they have a daughter, and kind of as a way of rebelling against her father, who's just quite the political man, she starts this relationship that she knows her family won't approve of. And then I know we're following the generations of this family, much like 100 Years of Solitude. It's also magical realism as they go through their lineage and their generations and the years and following them. Maybe they're making the same mistakes as the family in 100 Years of Solitude, maybe not. I don't really know. All I know is that I'm going to love it as well. I just thought it was a good book to put on a Halloween or October recommendations video because of course it's connected to ghosts and the spirit world. So that is The House of the Spirits. I really want to read it soon. It's a bit of a longer one, but it's gonna be so good. Also, I love the quote that this book opens with. Oh my gosh, it's a quote from Pablo Neruda, and it says, "How long does a man spend dying? What does it mean to say forever?" First sentence in chapter 1 is, "Barabas came to us by sea," the child Clara wrote in her delicate calligraphy. She was already in the habit of writing down important matters, and afterward, when she was mute, she also recorded trivialities, never suspecting that 50 years later I would use her notebooks to reclaim the past and overcome terrors of my own. So that's that one. This next book is a fairy tale retelling of Hans Christian Andersen's Tinderbox, and that book is Tinder by Sally Gardner. I read this last year and I really loved it. There's a lot of aspects I love about this book. Number one, the writing is beautiful, and this is very much in the style of an original fairy tale in that it is completely and utterly dark, hopeless, grimy, disgusting, horrifying. Sally Gardner doesn't shy away and try to retell it in this like nice, whimsical, fairy, golden, glowing honey sort of light. No, it's death, it's despair. It's a bad time for the people involved in this story, and I love it so much. Another thing I love about this book is that it comes with really beautiful illustrations on almost every single page. Some of these illustrations, as well as the story, are quite disturbing because there's a lot about death, both as a character and as something that happens to you, and there's a lot of gore, a lot of violence, but these are just, I love the artwork in here. So basically Sally Gardner decides to set the retelling of Tinderbox during the 30 Years' War, which took place in Europe. Was it exactly for 30 years? I feel like the names are always misleading, and then it's not actually 30 years, it's like 50 years or something like that. No, the 30 Years' War is actually a war that did wage 30 years, from 1618 to 1648. And we are following this young soldier whose name is Otto Hundebis. I think I'm saying that right. And in one of the battles, he is supposed to die. Death has arranged for it that he's going to die in this battle, but he somehow manages to defy death, escapes, and falls in love with this young woman named Sapphire. And this whole book, Tinder, is about his pursuit for her, trying to find her, trying to locate her, pin her down, and essentially marry her. Because they have that kind of fairy tale love, I guess. However, he meets so many cruel people along the way. He also discovers the secrets of the Tinderbox. I just thought it was really, it was just quite magical. I loved how dark it was. It is a book where like, it was a very exquisite, specific feeling, in that it felt when you were reading this book, even if you were reading it in the middle of the day or in a well-lit room, it felt like there was darkness all around you and you were surrounded by darkness and dimness and gloom, because the grayness that's in this book and kind of the illustrations combine a little bit to create this feeling, but it just felt like you were in a very closed space where everything's dark. And it feels a little bit like you're lost as you're following Otto stumbling around trying to get from town to town and being only lit and only lighting his way from the small flames of these few matches. So yeah, overall I really loved it, and I would like to read it again because it's been a while since last year. So yeah. Chapter 1. Once in a time of war, when I was a soldier in the Imperial Army, I saw death walking. He wore upon his skull a withered crown of white bone twisted with green hawthorn. His skeleton was shrouded with a tattered cloak of gold, and in his wake stood the ghosts of my comrades newly plucked, half-lived from life. Next up, we have a play that is an Oresteia translated by Anne Carson. This is the edition that has an Oresteia, the very famous tragedy, basically broken down into 3 parts by 3 famous Greek playwrights. We have Agamemnon by Aeschylus, Electra by Sophocles, and Orestes by Euripides. Anne Carson's way with ancient Greek and translating that into English is divine. I've never read anything like her translations. They're brilliant. You guys know Anne Carson is one of my favorite authors ever, and I really need to get into this translation because I've read most of these works, but just not in this translation and not in this combination, which I think is a really interesting idea and such a cool concept to kind of wrap these 3 different tellings of this myth and tragic legend of the house of Atreus and the curse that's been placed upon it. If you don't know, basically this kicks off with Agamemnon returning home from the Trojan War, and he's got a guest with him, Cassandra, who is a Trojan priestess. Of course, his wife, Clytemnestra, is not really thrilled about this, to say the least, and there might be some unfortunate events in Agamemnon's life concerning a bathtub and a dagger. So from there we follow the system of justice, we follow Agamemnon's son and daughter, and basically what goes on in their lives and ultimately the fate of the house of Atreus. So really spooky, really dark, gory, gruesome, perfect for Halloween, and just a story I'm never gonna get sick of. So an Oresteia. I wanted to put a nonfiction on this recommendations video, but I was like, what is like a nonfiction for Halloween or a spooky nonfiction? But I actually did come up with one I think is quite good. It's also one of the goriest books I've ever written, so if you're squeamish, don't read it because it's like comedic in how gory this nonfiction is, and that is The Butchering Art by Lindsay Fitzharris. I actually didn't know this existed until I found this at a thrift shop, and I was like, what is that? So basically this is about medicine, surgery, and the world of Victorian medicine and the medical things that were going on. More specifically, it is Joseph Lister's quest to transform the grisly world of Victorian medicine. So Joseph Lister, quite famously, is the doctor and the surgeon who invents antiseptic ? Yes, antiseptics. He's the one who basically starts to clamor about that germs are what is causing infections and essentially killing so many people in the Victorian period because their surgeries would go okay, and then of course afterwards they would just get infected with germs and die when they really didn't need to. So not only is this super interesting, but it goes over a lot of Victorian techniques, if you would like to call them that, of medicine and surgery. You feel so sorry for these people who are being worked on, and Lindsay Fitzharris really goes for it with the descriptions of basically what's going on to these patients and what these doctors have to do, and it's really interesting. Anything Victorian for me, I don't know why, just that whole time period, especially in literature and history, just screams Halloween. I've always wanted to go to like a Victorian murder mystery dinner or a Victorian like masquerade ball dinner. So that is The Butchering Art. That's the nonfiction that I decided to go with for this episode of the Rex Room. I didn't even welcome you back to the Rex Room, I'm so sorry. Next up we have a middle grade, and that is The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This is also a book I don't think it's gonna happen, but I really want to try and read it before October ends. I read Coraline last October and it was my first Neil Gaiman book, actually. Yes. I hadn't previously read a Neil Gaiman book, and Coraline is one of my favorite middle grades. It's one of my favorite movies. It is brilliant, and the book was actually horrifying. Like, if you've seen Coraline, the picture movie, what is this, the 1920s? If you've seen the movie Coraline, you know it's like horrifying, and there's some really scary parts in it, but somehow the book was actually more messed up. I decided to put the graveyard book on this one because this is also in the middle grade. We're following a boy named Nobody. He's actually being brought up in the graveyard quite tragically because his family has been murdered by this man, and if Bod ever dares to leave the graveyard, he places himself under the risk of being tracked down and hunted by the same man who killed his family. So it's kind of a pretty scary situation if you stay or if you leave, either way. But I'm just so interested because obviously just Gaiman's middle grade, they're always so good and fantastical and quirky for sure. So I'm really excited about this one. I'm gonna try and read it soon. So that is the graveyard book. All right, book number 11 of this 13 book recommendations video is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I have only read one Shirley Jackson book, and that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and man, was it good. So I'm really looking forward to reading The Haunting of Hill House, which sounds quite similar. I know there's a show out now and stuff like that. This one I'm a little bit foggy on what the details are. 4 seekers have arrived at the rambling old pile known as Hill House. Dr. Montague, an occult scholar looking for solid evidence of psychic phenomena, Theodora, his lovely and light-hearted assistant, Luke, the adventurous future inheritor of the estate, and Eleanor, a friendless, fragile young woman with a dark past. As they begin to cope with chilling, even horrifying occurrences beyond their control or understanding, they cannot possibly know what lies ahead. This is an absolutely horrifying ghost story, and I did watch like the first and second episode, I think, of the TV show when it first came out, and I'm kind of like, I'm a big baby about horror movies and horror shows, and it like really freaked me out. There was like this one scene, I don't want to say anything. I'm quite scared specifically of, I'm not sure what to call it. They're very widespread and popularly contrived scenes. It's the type of scene where we have one character who thinks that they know something, and I guess it's like an identity swap. Those scenes scare the heck out of me. Like the most famous one I'm thinking of, I think the first one that really scared me because I was younger, that's probably why I have this fear, is it was in the Spiderwick Chronicles. And our main character, Freddie Highmore, is basically getting the house ready to do battle and kind of protect himself against the spirits and against the really bad monsters outside. But then his dad opens the door. Before, we had kind of thought that his dad had abandoned him. So we're all kind of shocked and like, oh my gosh, his dad's back, this is amazing. Or at least my very naive 10-year-old self was like, this is amazing. And then it turns out that his dad is not his dad, and I think it's the uncanny. That's all it is. It's just the fear of the uncanny in like human form, specifically that fear when like you see someone but then it turns out that they're not them, they're not themselves, even though they resemble themselves, what themselves is. I don't know. I think it's horrifying. So anyway, House of Leaves. Oh my gosh. The Haunting of Hill House seems really to deal with that as well, so I'm sure I will get properly spooked and just love it. So that's this one. I also love the first sentence of this one. It's, no live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. I love that so much. I love that so much. All right, nearing the end here, we have one more classic and one more play. So the classic is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I am very interested in reading this book for a number of reasons. Not only is it perfect for Halloween because we are following this man, he's driving down this road, and this woman in white runs past him. It's the Victorian period. You've got women in white dresses running everywhere. He thinks she's pretty harmless and she just wants directions to get to London. She just wants to go to London. She just wants to have a day. So he gives her the directions and she is on her merry way. A little bit time later, some policemen come by and ask him if they have seen her, and of course he has. And it turns out that, of course, she's escaped from an asylum. So I'm not really sure what happens after that. That's all I know. I love this edition. This is the Arcturus edition. I'm also very interested in reading this because Wilkie Collins was a big friend of Charles Dickens. I'm just hoping this is scary. I love books that scare me. I like watching horror movies and I don't like watching horror movies. It kind of changes. But that feeling of craving fear and wanting to be scared, I find myself somewhere interested in books that I hope can deliver that feeling. So maybe The Woman in White will, but here it is. Last book on here, the 13th, is Macbeth by Shakespeare. I've actually never read Macbeth, even though I'm pretty sure a lot of people are familiar with the story, but I've just never read it cover to cover, and I would really like to. This is the story of Macbeth. It is one of Shakespeare's tragedies. It is full of language and witches and war and gore and damn spots and amazing things. So Macbeth, I think, could potentially be my favorite Shakespeare play if I ever get around to actually reading it. It's so beloved. I was particularly interested in it after reading If We Were Villains, which is a dark academia about Shakespeare. And yeah, so I just had to throw this guy on as the 13th, as the end, as the last book. I hope you enjoyed these recommendations. If you have any recommendations for anyone and anyone in the comments or for me, please tell me. I love spooky stories. I love them so much. It's the reason why I am on this earth. I hope you found some good ones. Hopefully, I hope your October TBR is giving you all the spooks and frights and delights you are looking for. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a very spooky evening, and I will see you very shortly in my next video. Ciao.